Today, I'm going to share with you the secret to becoming a top 1% podcast. Welcome to B2B On Air. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin. And in today's episode, we're going to talk through a couple crazy stats and the one thing you can do to break through the noise and get into the top 1%. The first stat is that only 47% of podcasts make it past episode 3. So if you record your first 3 episodes, you get past the launch, you're already in the top 50%. So the barrier to make it into the top 50% of producers is extremely low. And then if you make it to episode 11, you're in the top 10% because only 8% of podcasts ever go past episode 10. Now in B2B, a lot of times you're getting to that 10 to 12 episodes, but past 12 is where you see a huge dip for B2B podcasters. And then finally, to make it into the top 1%, you just have to get to 21 episodes. So if you get to episode 21 of your podcast, you've already produced more than 99% of the podcasts that start. And then once you get to episode 20, you've got a lot of the chops you need. You've worked out a lot of the kinks. You've kind of figured out how to do this, and it all becomes a lot easier. And then it's just figuring out how do you maintain the topics and the right guests so that you don't burn out. But if you make it past episode 20, it's way easier to continue going from there. So what can you do to keep going? The real secret is that you have to have grit, because when you're podcasting, there's going to be times that you sit down to record and you just don't feel like it, or you sit down to do some guest outreach and it's just too hard. And so you push it off until later. And the reason I'm recording this episode now is I just sat down to do a batch of podcast episodes and I thought it was going to be easy, and it was so hard to get into it. For some reason today, I started recording and I'm stumbling over my words. I'm trying to say certain words and they're just not coming out right. With this podcast, I'm trying something new where I'm mostly riffing. I'm trying not to have a lot of cuts and a lot of edits, both so that I can practice and get better at sharing things more clearly, and because it makes the process of editing and producing the show significantly easier. But today, it's just not going to be that way. A lot of the episodes I recorded, I had to do the intro a bunch of times. I had to stop and start over a bunch of times. And that's the name of the game. If you want to do this and you want to stick past episode 20, you have to be willing to do it when it gets hard, because you're going to run into slumps for whatever reason. And you've got to be able to sit down, buckle down, get over that hump, and just keep going. And if you do that, if you have grit, you can make it through. And then in order to have grit and actually make it through, making sure that you create structures and processes that make everything easier so that when you do sit down and you're having a difficult day, you have a structure to go back to, or you've already set up the list for your guests. So then you're just doing the outreach or whatever the structure is that you've created. Just make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, because on those times where you have to push through and you have to have that extra grit, you're going to fall back to those systems that you have in place. And if you have them, it makes it a lot easier to overcome. And if you don't, you're likely going to be able to push through the first couple times you run into something hard, and then you're not. Now, you might be listening to this episode and go, come on, is that really the trick? And honestly, it is. The podcasters who I know who keep going, they decide that this is something that's really important, either because they've already seen the value or they believe in the value they're going to get. And so they just keep going. They keep pressing through. They keep having that grit. And that's what I'm doing today. I sat down, I recorded 5 podcast episodes today for this show. And instead of stopping when it was hard, I pushed through. Now it's taken me about 2 or 3 times longer than I planned to do this. But I just went ahead and made it happen. And so if you want to make it into the top 1% of podcasters, have grit, get past episode 20. And if you make it there, you can keep it going to the very top. Thanks for tuning in to this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.